The battle station Meridian was dying. Cole Warren could feel it in the way the floor shook beneath his boots, in the way the lights flickered and went dark, in the way the air itself seemed to scream as it escaped through holes torn in the hull. He pressed his back against a twisted metal wall and tried to catch his breath. His lungs burned. His hands were slick with blood, some of it his own, most of it not. Around him, the sounds of war filled every corner of the station. Gunfire echoed through the corridors. Men and women screamed orders, screamed in pain, screamed in fear. The deep boom of explosions rolled through the structure like thunder that never stopped. And beneath it all, there was another sound, a high-pitched whine that Cole had learned to recognize over 11 years of fighting. It was the sound of plasma weapons charging. He checked his rifle, 17 rounds left in the magazine, 2 spare magazines on his belt, not enough. Not nearly enough for what was coming. Cole was 34 years old. He had been fighting since he was 23, when they had first appeared in human space and begun their conquest. In those 11 years, he had seen things that would haunt him until the day he died. He had watched friends burn. He had held dying soldiers in his arms as they called for their mothers. He had killed so many of the enemy that he had lost count somewhere around the 500th. There were monsters. That was what everyone said. That was what Cole had believed for most of his adult life. They were 7 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. They had 4 eyes that could see in the dark, claws that could tear through body armor, and a complete lack of mercy for any human they encountered. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They simply killed and conquered, moving from system to system like a plague of destruction. Cole had lost his best friend to thee in his first year of service. Danny Reeves had been 22 years old, fresh out of training, full of jokes and laughter and dreams about what he would do when the war was over. A soldier had cut him in half with a plasma blade while Cole watched, unable to do anything but scream. After that, Cole had stopped seeing thee as living beings. They were targets. They were the enemy. They were things to be killed before they could kill you. It was the only way to survive. It was the only way to stay sane. Now, 11 years later, Cole was one of the most decorated soldiers in the human military. Sergeant First Class Cole Warren, recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart with 3 clusters. A hero, according to the recruitment posters. A killer, according to his own nightmares. The station shook again, harder this time. Somewhere nearby, a section of the hull gave way, and Cole heard the terrible rushing sound of atmosphere escaping into the void. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trying to contain the damage, but it was a losing battle. The Meridian had been built to house 3,000 people. According to the last report Cole had heard, less than 500 were still alive. He needed to move. Staying in one place meant death. They were sweeping through the station level by level, killing everything they found. Cole's unit had been scattered in the initial attack. He had no idea if any of them were still alive. All he could do was keep moving, keep fighting, and hope to find a way to one of the escape pods before the whole station came apart. Cole pushed himself off the wall and started down the corridor. His boots crunched on broken glass and twisted metal. The emergency lights cast everything in a dim red glow that made the blood on the walls look black. He passed bodies as he moved. Human bodies, torn and burned, lying in pools of their own fluids. He did not stop to check if any of them were alive. There was no time. There was never any time. The corridor split ahead, and Cole paused to get his bearings. The escape pods were on the lower levels, near the engineering section. He needed to go down, but the main lifts were almost certainly destroyed or controlled by the enemy. That left the maintenance shafts, narrow tubes that ran between the levels like veins in a body. Cole had used them before in other battles. They were cramped and dangerous, but they were better than trying to fight through corridors full of soldiers. He found a maintenance access panel, and it opened with his combat knife. The shaft beyond was dark, lit only by small emergency strips that gave off barely enough light to see. Cole took a breath, said a quiet prayer to a god he was not sure he believed in anymore, and climbed inside. The shaft was tight, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Cole had to move on his hands and knees, his rifle strapped to his back, his breath loud in his ears. The metal walls pressed in on him from all sides. He had never liked small spaces. After 11 years of war, he had a lot of things he did not like anymore. He crawled for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The shaft branched several times, and Cole had to stop and think at each junction, trying to remember the station's layout from the briefings he had sat through before the battle. Left, then right, then down a vertical section that required him to brace himself against the walls and lower himself slowly, his arms shaking with exhaustion. Finally, he reached another access panel. Cole pressed his ear against the metal and listened. Silence. That did not mean it was safe, but it meant it was better than staying in the shaft. He took out his knife, worked the panel loose, and dropped down into the corridor beyond. He was in the civilian section now. Cole recognized it from the different color of the walls, the softer lighting, the signs pointing to residential quarters and recreation areas. This part of the station had been built for families, for the wives and husbands and children of the military personnel stationed on the Meridian. Cole had never spent much time here. He had no family, no one waiting for him in the comfortable quarters. Just an empty bunk, and the company of other soldiers who had nothing left to lose. The civilian section was quiet in a way that made Cole's skin crawl. Not the quiet of safety, but the quiet of aftermath. He passed more bodies here, civilians this time, people who had never held a weapon in their lives. An old man in a bathrobe lying face down in a pool of blood. A young woman, barely out of her teens, curled against a wall with her hands over her head as if that could have protected her. A child's shoe, sitting alone in the middle of the corridor, no sign of the child who had worn it. Cole felt something twist in his chest, something he had learned to push down and ignore. Anger, grief. The desperate, helpless fury of a man who had spent 11 years fighting and still could not protect the innocent. He pushed it down now like he always did. There was no room for emotion in combat. Emotion got you killed. He moved through the civilian section as quickly as he dared, checking corners, scanning for movement. The escape pods were close now. He could see signs pointing toward them, could feel the faint vibration of the station's emergency systems trying to prepare them for launch. If he could just reach them, if he could just get off this dying station, he might survive to fight another day. That was when he heard the sound. It was soft, barely audible over the distant rumble of explosions and the hiss of escaping atmosphere. A high-pitched keening like nothing Cole had ever heard before. He stopped, his finger on the trigger of his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound was coming from ahead, from a doorway marked with the symbol for a civilian shelter. Every instinct Cole had screamed at him to keep moving. The sound was probably a trap. They were known for using bait, for luring humans into ambushes with false signals of distress. He should ignore it. He should focus on survival. He should be smart. But the sound did not stop. It rose and fell, like a voice crying out in pain or fear, and there was something in it that made Cole's feet move before his brain could catch up. He approached the doorway slowly, his rifle raised, ready to fire at the first sign of movement. The door was half open, jammed on its track by debris from a collapsed section of ceiling. Cole squeezed through the gap and found himself in a small room that had once been a family shelter. Emergency supplies lined the walls, canned food and water containers and medical kits. A cot sat in the corner, its blankets torn and scattered. And in the center of the room, huddled against an overturned table, was a sight that made Cole freeze in place. A female crouched in the rubble. She was injured, Cole could see that immediately. One of her arms hung at her side at a wrong angle, clearly broken. Her scales, which should have been bright and shifting, were dull with dust and dried blood. But she was not what held Cole's attention. In her good arm she held a small form, a child, a youngling no bigger than a human toddler. Its scales were pale green, soft and unformed, the way all young were before they reached maturity. And it was the source of the sound Cole had heard. The child was crying. Cole had never heard a cry before. He had not known they could cry. In 11 years of war, he had seen them fight, seen them kill, seen them die. But he had never seen them do anything that looked like grief or fear. They were the enemy. They were monsters. Monsters did not cry. But this child was crying. It was making that high-pitched keening sound, its small body shaking in its mother's arms, its 4 eyes squeezed shut. And the mother, the female, was making a softer sound in response, a low humming that Cole realized was meant to be soothing. She was trying to comfort her child. She was trying to make it feel safe. The female's 4 eyes locked onto Cole's face. She did not reach for a weapon. She did not try to attack. She simply curled her body around her child and waited. Her eyes held no anger, no hatred, only a terrible, desperate resignation. She knew she was going to die. She knew her child was going to die, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Cole stood frozen in the doorway, his rifle pointed at the enemy, his finger on the trigger. This was what he had been trained to do. This was what he had done hundreds of times before. They were the enemy. They showed no mercy to humans. Why should he show mercy to them? But the child kept crying. That sound, that awful, heartbreaking sound, cut through everything Cole had built up inside himself over 11 years of war. It cut through the anger and the hatred and the carefully constructed walls that kept him sane. Because that sound was not the sound of a monster. It was the sound of something small and helpless and terrified. It was the sound of a child who did not understand why the world was full of fire and death. Cole lowered his rifle. The female's eyes widened. Her scales shifted color from dull gray to something that might have been surprise. She made a sound, a single word in her own language that Cole's translator did not catch. But he understood the tone. It was a question. She was asking why. Cole did not have an answer. He did not understand it himself. All he knew was that he could not pull the trigger, not like this, not with that child crying in its mother's arms. He took a step back, then another. He was going to leave. He was going to walk away and pretend he had never seen this room, never heard that sound. He would find the escape pods and get off this station and forget that this moment had ever happened. That was when the explosion came. Cole did not hear it. There was no sound, no warning. One moment he was standing in the doorway, and the next moment the world was fire. The wall behind him ripped apart as a secondary detonation tore through the corridor, the result of a ruptured power conduit or a delayed charge, or just the random violence of a station tearing itself to pieces. Heat washed over him like a wave, and he felt shrapnel punch through the air around him. Cole did not think. Thinking took time, and there was no time. His body moved on pure instinct, on 11 years of combat reflexes honed to a razor's edge. But instead of diving for cover, instead of rolling away from the blast, he did something that made no sense. He threw himself forward, toward the child, and wrapped his body around it. The fire hit his back like the fist of an angry god. He felt his armor melt, felt the metal fuse to his skin. He felt shrapnel tear through the gaps in his protection, felt pieces of hot metal bury themselves in his flesh. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, beyond anything he had imagined was possible. It was absolute. It was overwhelming. It was everything. But beneath him, the child was still crying, and that meant the child was still alive. Cole's vision went dark at the edges. He could feel blood filling his mouth, could feel his body trying to shut down from the trauma. But he did not move. He kept his body curled over the small form beneath him, kept his arms wrapped around it, kept himself between the child and the fire that still raged around them. The explosion died. The fire faded. Cole lay still, his breath coming in short, wet gasps, his body a landscape of pain that he could not map. But he could still feel the child moving beneath him. He could still hear it crying, softer now, confused and frightened but alive. He tried to lift his head. It took everything he had, every ounce of strength that remained in his broken body. He managed to raise himself a few inches, enough to see the female staring at him with all four of her eyes wide open. She was untouched. The table she had been hiding behind had shielded her from the worst of the blast, but Cole had been standing in the open. Cole had taken the full force of the explosion, and instead of saving himself, he had used his body to protect her child. She made that sound again, that low, resonant tone that Cole's translator could not interpret. But this time, there was something different in it, something that almost sounded like grief. Cole tried to speak. He wanted to say something, anything, to explain what he had done and why. But blood filled his throat, and all that came out was a wet cough. His arms gave out, and he collapsed onto his side, his body curling in on itself as the pain finally became too much to bear. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the female reaching toward him with her good arm. The last thing he heard was her voice, speaking words he did not understand in a tone that might have been a prayer. Then there was nothing. Cole Warren had been a soldier for 11 years. He had killed more enemies than he could count. He had watched friends die and kept fighting. He had built walls around his heart to keep out the pain of war. But in the end, when it mattered most, he had thrown himself over an enemy child and let the fire take him instead. He did not know why. He would never fully understand why. All he knew in that last moment before consciousness fled was that the child had been crying, and he could not let it die. That was the kind of man Cole Warren was. That was the kind of human he chose to be. And that choice would change everything. The female was named, though Cole would not learn this until much later. She crouched in the ruined shelter, her broken arm throbbing with pain, her child clutched against her chest, and stared at the human who lay bleeding on the floor. She did not understand what had just happened. Had been alive for 112 cycles, what humans would call years. In that time, she had risen from a lowly worker caste to become the third voice of the conquered, one of the 7 rulers of her civilization. She had commanded fleets. She had crushed rebellions. She had ordered the deaths of millions. She was one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, and she had achieved that power by understanding the universe and the creatures that lived in it. But she did not understand this. The human should have killed her. That was what humans did. That was what they did. In 11 years of war, neither side had shown mercy to the other. Both species killed each other on sight, without hesitation, without remorse. It was the natural order of things. It was the way of war. But this human had not killed her. He had looked at her child, and lowered his weapon. And then, when the explosion came, he had done something that made no sense at all. He had thrown himself over. He had covered his daughter with his own body. He had taken the fire and the shrapnel into his own flesh so that a child of his enemies would live. Did not know how to process this. Her mind, trained in politics and warfare and the cold calculus of power, could not find a category for what she had just witnessed. It was not strategy. It was not a tactic to gain advantage. The human had gained nothing by his actions except wounds that would almost certainly kill him. He had saved an enemy child for no reason that could determine. Stirred in her arms, making a soft sound of distress. Looked down at her daughter, at the small form that was the most precious thing in her existence. Was 8 cycles old, barely past infancy by standards. Her scales were still soft, still changing color with her emotions. She did not understand war. She did not understand enemies. She only understood that someone had wrapped around her and kept her warm and safe when everything was loud and hot and frightening. Made a decision. She sat down gently, making sure the child was stable and unhurt. Then she moved to the human and knelt beside him. He was still breathing, but barely. His back was a ruin of melted armor and burned flesh. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the floor in a dark tide. By all logic, by all medical knowledge, he should already be dead. The fact that he was still alive was a testament to either human resilience or pure stubbornness, and was not sure which. She reached for the communication device at her belt and pressed the emergency signal. Within moments, a voice crackled through the speaker, speaking in the rapid clicks and tones of the language. Third voice, we are reading your position. A retrieval team is on the way. What is your status? Looked at the dying human on the floor. She looked at her daughter, who was watching with wide, curious eyes. She thought about what she had just witnessed, about the impossible choice this soldier had made. I am uninjured, she said. My daughter is safe, but I have a human here who requires immediate medical attention. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When the voice returned, it was hesitant. Third voice, did you say a human? We do not provide medical care to enemy combatants. Standing orders are to terminate all humans on site. I know what the standing orders are, said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. I am giving you a new order. This human is to be transported to my ship and given the best medical care we can provide. He is not to be harmed. He is not to be interrogated. He is under my personal protection. Another pause, longer this time. Third voice, I must ask for clarification. Why are we preserving this human? Looked at the soldier again. His face was pale, almost gray, and his breathing had become even more shallow. He did not have much time left. Because he saved my daughter's life, said simply. And among our people, that creates a debt that cannot be ignored. She ended the communication and turned her attention back to the human. His eyes were closed, but she could see movement beneath the lids, as if he was dreaming. She wondered what humans dreamed about. She wondered if this one was dreaming of the choice he had made, the impossible, inexplicable choice to protect an enemy child. Reached out and touched his face. His skin was hot, feverish, burning up from within as his body tried to fight the damage that had been done to it. He did not react to her touch. He was too far gone for that. Stay alive, she said softly, speaking in English, the human language she had learned as part of her military training. You have done something that I do not understand. I need to understand it. So stay alive, human. That is an order. He did not respond, but his breathing continued, shallow and ragged, clinging to life with a stubbornness that found oddly admirable. Crawled over and pressed herself against the side, making a questioning sound. Wrapped her good arm around her daughter and held her close. The human saved you, she explained, knowing that was too young to truly understand. He is hurt because he protected you. We are going to help him now. Looked at the human with her 4 young eyes. Then she did something that surprised. She reached out with one small hand and touched the human's arm, making a soft trilling sound that recognized. It was the sound children made when they were trying to comfort someone. Felt something shift in her chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. It was not quite emotion, not in the way humans would define it. The experienced feelings differently, more like tides than storms, slow and deep and powerful. But whatever it was significant. It was a change. This human had done something unprecedented. He had shown mercy to an enemy. He had sacrificed himself for a child who should have been his target. In doing so, he had created a bond that could not ignore, even if she wanted to. The retrieval team arrived within minutes. 4 soldiers in combat armor, their weapons ready, their expressions hidden behind their helmets. They stopped short when they saw the scene, when they saw their third voice kneeling beside a dying human with her daughter pressing against the enemy's arm. Third voice, the team leader said carefully, what are your orders? Stood lifting with her good arm. Transport the human to my ship, carefully. He is injured and fragile. If he dies because of your negligence, I will hold you personally responsible. The soldiers exchanged glances but did not argue. One did not argue with the third voice. They moved forward and lifted the human with surprising gentleness, placing him on a medical stretcher and securing him for transport. Followed them out of the shelter, through the ruined corridors of the station, past the bodies of humans and alike. The battle was still raging in other parts of the station, but this section had been secured. Her soldiers had done their work well. As they walked, the team leader fell into step beside her. Third voice, may I speak freely? You may. The other voices will ask questions. Preserving a human, bringing him aboard your ship, it is unprecedented. They will demand an explanation. Nodded, I am aware, and I will give them one, but not until I understand it myself. Understand what? Third voice looked at the human on the stretcher, at his ruined back and his pale face and his stubborn, impossible survival. I need to understand why he did it, she said. Why he saved my daughter, why he threw himself over her when he could have run, why a human of all creatures showed mercy to one of us. The team leader was silent for a moment. Then he said, perhaps he was simply weak. Humans are known to be emotional creatures. Perhaps he could not control his instincts. No, said firmly. That was not weakness, that was something else, something I have never seen before. She paused, considering her words. Weakness would have been running away. Weakness would have been freezing in fear. What he did required strength. It required a choice. He chose to save my daughter, knowing it would cost him his life. But why would he make such a choice? Did not answer. She did not have an answer, but she intended to find one. They reached the docking bay where personal transport waited. It was a sleek vessel, built for speed and comfort rather than combat, fitted with the best technology the Concord could provide. The medical bay was small but well-equipped, designed to handle injuries sustained in assassination attempts or political accidents. The soldiers carried the human inside and placed him in the medical pod, a cylindrical chamber filled with healing gel that would stabilize his injuries and begin the long process of repair. Watched as they sealed the pod, as the gel rose around the human's body and the machines began their work. Will he survive? She asked the ship's medical officer, a young named who had served for 3 cycles. Studied the readings on his console, his 4 eyes narrowing in concentration. It is difficult to say, third voice. Human physiology is different from ours. The healing gel should work, but I cannot guarantee the outcome. He has lost a great deal of blood, and the damage to his internal organs is severe. Do everything you can. Bowed his head, of course, third voice. Turned away from the medical bay and walked to the observation deck at the front of the ship. Through the transparent walls, she could see the battle station Meridian, now little more than a burning wreck against the stars. Explosions still flashed along its hull. Escape pods streamed away from it like seeds from a dying flower. The human soldiers were fleeing, trying to survive, while her own forces pressed the attack. Normally would have felt satisfaction at the sight. The Meridian had been a thorn in the Conquered's side for years, a staging point for human counterattacks that had cost lives. Its destruction was a victory, one that would be celebrated throughout the Empire. But now, watching it burn, felt something different. She felt tired. She felt old. She felt the weight of 112 cycles pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. How many times had she watched scenes like this? How many stations had she destroyed? How many colonies had she burned? How many lives had she ended in the name of the conquered? She had lost count long ago. The war had become a constant, a background noise in her existence, something that simply was and always would be. But the human in her medical bay had shown her something new. He had shown her that even in the midst of all this death, even in the heart of battle, there was still room for mercy. There was still room for choice. Tugged at her leg and looked down at her daughter. The child's scales had shifted to a soft blue, the color of contentment and safety. She was calm now, the trauma of the shelter fading from her young mind. Children were resilient that way. They could recover from things that would break an adult. Mother said, using the formal term that children were taught from birth, who was the soft one? Felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth, an expression she rarely allowed herself. The soft one was a common term for humans, a reference to their lack of scales and their fragile skin. He is a soldier, she said. A human soldier. He was hurt protecting you. Scales shifted to a curious green. Why did he protect me? He is enemy. That is a very good question, said. I do not know the answer yet, but I intend to find out. Seemed to accept this. She was too young to understand the complexities of war and politics and the bonds that could form between enemies. She only understood that someone had kept her safe when she was scared, and that was enough. Picked up her daughter and held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her scales, feeling the warmth of her small body against her chest, was everything to her. She was the result of a genetic bonding that had cost her mate, a ritual that could only be performed once in a lifetime. She was the future of family line, the continuation of everything she had built and achieved. And a human soldier had almost died to save her. Turned away from the observation deck and carried her daughter to their quarters. She needed rest. She needed time to think. And most importantly, she needed the human to survive because she had questions that only he could answer. The ship's engines hummed as they disengaged from the battle and set course for space. Behind them, the meridian continued to burn, a pyre for the hundreds of lives that had been lost in the fighting. Human lives and lives, mixed together in death, indistinguishable in the flames. War made equals of everyone. Enemies and allies, soldiers and civilians, they all burned the same in the end. But perhaps, thought as she lay down beside her sleeping daughter, perhaps it did not have to be this way. Perhaps the human in her medical bay had shown her a different path, a path she had never considered before. It was a dangerous thought. It was the kind of thought that could get a third voice removed from power, or worse. The conquered did not tolerate weakness, and mercy toward humans was the greatest weakness of all. But had not risen to her position by being afraid of dangerous thoughts. She had risen by being willing to see what others could not see, to do what others would not do. And right now, she was seeing something in that human soldier that she had never seen in any enemy before. She was seeing a reflection of herself. Not in the obvious ways, not in appearance or culture or background, but in the choice he had made, because knew, deep in her core, that she would have done the same thing. If a human had somehow found herself in a position to save a child, would have expected her to kill without hesitation. But if positions were reversed, if had been the one standing over a helpless human child, she liked to think she would have made the same choice the human soldier had made. She liked to think she would have lowered her weapon and walked away. But she was not sure, and that uncertainty troubled her more than anything else. Closed her eyes and let sleep take her daughter warm against her side, her thoughts full of fire and mercy, and the face of a human soldier who had done the impossible. Tomorrow she would have answers. Tomorrow she would understand. Or tomorrow the human would be dead, and the questions would haunt her forever. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. 3 days passed before Cole Warren opened his eyes again. He woke slowly, rising through layers of darkness like a diver ascending from deep water. His first conscious thought was that he was not in pain. This struck him as strange because he remembered pain. He remembered fire. He remembered the feeling of his body being torn apart by forces beyond his control. But now there was no pain. There was only warmth and softness and a gentle pressure against his skin that felt almost like floating. He opened his eyes. He was in a tube of some kind, suspended in a thick golden gel that surrounded him on all sides. The gel was warm and slightly viscous, and it moved with him as he shifted, supporting his weight without any sense of resistance. Through the gel, he could see lights, soft and blue, and the outline of a room that looked nothing like any human medical facility he had ever seen. Cole tried to move his arms. They responded sluggishly, as if moving through water. He tried to speak, but the gel filled his mouth, and all that came out was a muffled sound. Panic began to rise in his chest, the instinctive fear of being trapped, of being unable to move or breathe or escape. Then a face appeared above him, looking down through the top of the tube. It was not a human face. Cole's heart lurched. The face belonged to He could see that immediately. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, scales that shifted through shades of green and blue, the angular features that he had learned to recognize over 11 years of war. The enemy. Cole tried to struggle, tried to fight, but his body would not cooperate. The gel held him in place, gentle but immovable, and all his efforts accomplished nothing except exhausting him further. He was helpless. He was trapped. He was in the hands of the enemy. The said something, words that his translator could not catch through the gel. Then the face disappeared, and Cole heard sounds above him, mechanical sounds of things moving and shifting. A moment later, the gel began to drain, flowing out of the tube through openings in the bottom. Cole felt himself lowering, his body settling onto a soft surface beneath him, his skin tingling as the gel pulled away and exposed him to the air. The top of the tube opened, and Cole found himself looking up at the ceiling of an alien medical bay. The lights were soft and blue, nothing like the harsh fluorescence of human hospitals. The air smelled strange, like copper and flowers, a scent he did not recognize. They leaned over him again. It was a male, Cole realized now, recognizing the subtle differences in scale pattern that distinguished sexes. The male was speaking, and this time Cole's translator began to catch words. Conscious, remarkable human, can you understand me? Cole tried to speak. His throat was raw, and the first sound that came out was more like a croak than a word. He swallowed, tasted something sweet and metallic on his tongue, and tried again. Where am I? The male made a gesture that Cole did not recognize. You are aboard the throne of whispered stars, personal vessel of the third voice of the conquered. You have been unconscious for 3 days while the healing systems repaired your injuries. Cole processed this information slowly. His mind felt sluggish, foggy, as if the gel had seeped into his brain and made everything slower. The third voice. That was one of the rulers of the civilization. He knew that from intelligence briefings, from the endless studies of enemy structure and hierarchy that all soldiers were required to complete. But why would a ruler save a human soldier? Why would anyone save him? Then the memories came back. The battle station, the shelter, the female and her child, the explosion and the choice he had made. The child, Cole said. His voice was stronger now, though still rough. The little one is she. The male's scales shifted to a color Cole did not recognize. The child is unharmed, thanks to you. He paused, studying Cole with all 4 eyes. The third voice wishes to speak with you. Are you strong enough? Cole considered the question. He did not feel strong. He felt weak, disoriented, lost. He was a prisoner aboard an enemy ship, surrounded by beings who should have killed him the moment they found him. Nothing about this situation made sense. But he needed answers, and apparently so did the. Yes, he said, I can talk. The male nodded, another gesture that must have been learned from studying humans. Then I will inform the third voice. Please remain still. Your body is still healing, and excessive movement could cause damage. He turned and left the room, his footsteps almost silent on the strange, smooth floor. Cole lay on his back and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened to him. 3 days. He had been unconscious for 3 days. In that time, the battle for Meridian must have ended. The station was probably destroyed by now, all hands lost. His unit, his friends, everyone he had served with, they were probably all dead. And he was alive. Alive because the enemy had saved him. Alive because he had saved one of their children. Cole closed his eyes and remembered the shelter, the female and her offspring. He remembered the sound of the child crying, that high-pitched keening that had cut through everything. He remembered lowering his rifle, remembered turning away, remembered the explosion and the fire and the choice he had made without thinking. Why had he done it? He had asked himself that question 100 times in the years that followed, and he never found a satisfying answer. It was not heroism, not in any traditional sense. It was not strategy or tactics or any rational calculation of benefit and cost. It was simply something that he had done, something that had risen up from deep inside him and taken control before his conscious mind could intervene. The child had been crying. That was all. A small, helpless being, terrified and confused, caught in a war it did not understand. And Cole, who had spent 11 years hardening his heart against the enemy, had found that he could not let it die. Maybe that said something about him. Maybe it said something about humanity. Or maybe it was just a moment of weakness, a failure of the walls he had built, and he would spend the rest of his life paying for it. If they let him live that long. The door opened, and Cole turned his head to see who had entered. It was the female from the shelter. He recognized her immediately, though her appearance had changed. Her scales were bright now, shifting through shades of deep blue and violet, the colors of health and power. Her broken arm was healed, held straight at her side, and she moved with a grace and confidence that spoke of authority and command. She was beautiful, Cole realized. Not in a human way, not in any way he could have explained. But there was something in the way she moved, in the way her scales caught the light, that spoke to something deep and old in his brain. A recognition of power and presence that transcended species. Behind her came a smaller figure. The child, walking on her own now, her pale green scales bright with curiosity. She looked at Cole with her 4 young eyes, and he saw no fear in her face, only wonder. The female stopped at the foot of Cole's bed, which he now realized was some kind of medical platform suspended above the floor. She studied him in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke in English, her accent strange but comprehensible. "You are awake." Cole nodded slowly. "Yes." "Do you remember what happened on the station?" "Yes." She tilted her head, a gesture that Cole had learned to interpret as curiosity in the. "Then, you remember saving my daughter's life?" It was not a question, but Cole answered anyway. "Yes, I remember." The female was silent again. The child moved forward and climbed onto the edge of Cole's bed with the fearless curiosity of the young. She reached out and touched his arm, her small claws gentle against his skin. "The soft one," she said, the words heavily accented but clear. "You are warm." Cole did not know how to respond. He looked at the child, at her innocent face and her shifting scales, and felt something twist in his chest. This was the being he had almost died for. This small, curious creature who called him the soft one and touched his arm with wonder. The female spoke again. "My name is, I am the third voice of the conquered, and I have questions for you, human." Cole met her eyes, all 4 of them. "I have questions too." "Then we will trade," said. "A question for a question, is this acceptable?" Cole considered. He was in no position to negotiate. He was a prisoner, injured and weak, completely at the mercy of his captors. But the female was offering dialogue instead of interrogation. That was more than he had expected. "Acceptable," he said. Inclined her head. "Then I will begin. Why did you save my daughter?" Cole opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. It was the question he had been asking himself since the moment it happened. It was the question he could not answer. "I do not know," he said finally. "I heard her crying, I saw her in your arms, and I could not." He paused, searching for words. "I could not let her die, even though she was my enemy, even though I should have killed you both, I just could not." Studied him for a long moment. Then she made that sound again, that low, resonant tone that his translator could not interpret. "Your turn," she said. Cole thought about what he wanted to know. There were so many questions, so many things that did not make sense about his situation, but one stood out above the rest. "Why did you save me?" he asked. "Your people do not take prisoners. You could have let me die. You should have let me die. Why didn't you?" Scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue. "Because you saved my daughter," she said. "And among my people, that creates a debt that cannot be broken." A debt. Yes, in our culture, when someone saves a child at the risk of their own life, they become bound to that child's family. It is one of our oldest traditions, dating back to before we traveled between stars. The bond is called shield kindred, and it cannot be dissolved by anything except death. Cole absorbed this information slowly. So because I saved your daughter, I'm, what, part of your family now? Tilted her head again. In a sense, the bond creates obligations on both sides. You are bound to protect my family line, and I am bound to protect you. She paused. That is why you are alive. That is why I brought you to my ship and ordered my physicians to heal your wounds. Because you are shield kindred now, and among my people that is a sacred thing. Cole did not know what to say. He had expected to die on that station. He had expected to be killed by the enemy or left to bleed out among the ruins. Instead, he had been saved, healed, and told that he was part of an alien family because of a choice he had made in a moment of madness. The universe, it seemed, had a very strange sense of humor. Tugged at his arm, drawing his attention back to the present. "Soft one," she said, "will you stay with us?" Cole looked at the child, then at her mother. He did not know how to answer that question. He did not know what any of this meant, or what would happen next, or whether he would ever see another human again. But for the first time since the battle began, he felt something other than fear and exhaustion. He felt the smallest flicker of hope. "I do not know," he said honestly, "but I am here now." Made a trilling sound that might have been happiness and pressed herself against his side. Her scales were warm through the thin medical gown he wore, and her weight was surprisingly comforting. Watched them with an expression Cole could not read. Then she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "We have much to discuss, human. Many questions remain, but for now rest, heal. You are safe here." She turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold to look back at him. "My daughter has decided she likes you," she said. "She has never liked anyone outside our family before. I do not know what that means yet, but I intend to find out." Then she was gone, leaving Cole alone with the child who had changed everything. He lay back on the medical platform and stared at the ceiling, feeling warmth against his side, listening to her soft breathing as she began to drift off to sleep. He was alive. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything he had ever known about the enemy, he was alive. And somehow, impossibly, he was not alone. Cole closed his eyes and let sleep take him again. His last thought before darkness claimed him, a single, impossible word. Hope.